Some moments in life change everything, and for Vanessa Wilson, today is one of them. She walked into that dealership expecting a fight, but she didn't expect to be dismissed before she even opened her mouth. What happens when the tables turn? Let us know in the comments section below. The sleek, gleaming cars on the showroom floor reflected the overhead lights like mirrors, their metallic finishes polished to perfection. The air smelled of leather, new upholstery, and the faint undertone of expensive cologne. Salesmen in crisp suits prowled the dealership, their eyes scanning for the next customer, the next commission. Vanessa Wilson stepped through the glass doors, her heels clicking against the marble tiles. Her posture was poised, her expression unreadable. She wasn't in a hurry. She didn't need to be. A few feet away, Greg Patterson leaned against a cherry-red sports car, his arms folded across his chest. He was mid-conversation with a younger colleague, a cocky smirk on his face. "I swear, some people just come in here to waste our time," he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Vanessa to hear. She caught the glance he threw in her direction, assessing her like she was a lost tourist who had wandered into the wrong part of town. His eyes skimmed her jeans, her blouse. Nothing designer, nothing flashy. She wasn't draped in jewelry, she didn't clutch a designer handbag. To him, that was enough to dismiss her. She ignored it. Vanessa walked further inside, scanning the rows of luxury vehicles. A Rolls-Royce Phantom sat in the corner, gleaming under the showroom lights. Next to it, a Mercedes AMG 63, black and menacing. She took her time, her fingers lightly tracing the smooth, cold metal of the nearest car's hood. Greg sighed, pushing off the sports car. He strode toward her with the weary patience of a man who had dealt with too many window shoppers for one day. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, his voice thick with forced politeness. "Looking for something specific?" She turned to him, meeting his gaze head-on. "Just browsing." Greg fought the urge to roll his eyes. "Just browsing," code for, "I can't afford anything in here, but I want to pretend for a few minutes." "Well," he said, slapping a hand on the roof of a sleek black Porsche, "we have plenty to browse, but this is a high-end dealership. If you're looking for something more affordable, I can point you in the right direction." Vanessa's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Is that so?" Greg nodded, missing the warning in her tone. "Yeah. We get people in here all the time thinking they can negotiate, but trust me, these cars don't move for anything less than what they're worth." Her eyes flickered with amusement. "And what exactly do you think I can afford?" Greg hesitated, realizing a second too late that he might have stepped into dangerous territory. But it was too late to backpedal now. "Well," he said, dragging the word out, "I mean, it's all about finding the right fit. A budget-friendly option might be more practical, you know?" Vanessa exhaled a slow, measured breath, but before she could respond, another voice cut in. "Greg." They both turned. Carla Owens, the dealership's manager, stood near the front desk, her arms crossed. She had seen enough. Greg straightened, plastering a sheepish grin on his face. Carla eyed Vanessa with something that resembled understanding, then shifted her gaze back to Greg. "A word?" Greg hesitated but nodded, giving Vanessa a final glance before retreating toward Carla's office. Vanessa watched them go, her expression unreadable. Then she turned back to the showroom floor. She wasn't here for a car. She was here to take back what was hers. Vanessa didn't sit. She could have, but something about sitting felt like giving up control, like playing along. Instead, she stood in front of the receptionist's desk, her fingers drumming lightly on the countertop. The woman behind it, an older lady with sharp eyes and an even sharper haircut, glanced up from her computer. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I have a meeting with Michael Wilson," Vanessa said evenly. The receptionist frowned, her brows knitting together in mild confusion. It wasn't that Michael didn't take meetings, he did, often, but they were always scheduled, planned, weeks in advance. Vanessa could see the woman's hesitation, the quick flick of her gaze toward the office doors as if she were debating whether to let her through or send her away. "You have an appointment. Tell him it's his wife." A beat. Then, as an afterthought, or rather, his ex-wife. That did it. The receptionist's expression shifted. Awareness dawned behind her eyes, the slow realization creeping in like a shadow stretching across the floor. She didn't say anything, just picked up the phone, her fingers pressing the extension with precision. "Mr. Wilson," she said smoothly, "there's a—" She hesitated, glancing up at Vanessa. "A Vanessa Wilson here to see you." Silence. Vanessa could practically hear the weight of it through the phone, the seconds stretching long. Then a clipped response. "Send her in." The receptionist set the phone down, her professional mask slipping just enough to betray her curiosity. "Straight through those doors," she said, nodding toward the large glass office at the back of the showroom. Vanessa didn't thank her. She just turned and walked. The glass doors swung open at the push of her palm, revealing a space that was far too pristine to belong to a man like Michael. It was all polished wood, leather seating and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the dealership lot. A massive desk sat near the back, the chair behind it turned toward the window, facing away from her. Vanessa didn't wait for him to turn. "You've been avoiding my calls," she said, closing the door behind her. A chuckle, low and knowing. The chair swiveled, and there he was. Michael Wilson, the man who once shared her last name, the man who had built this empire with her, then tried to cut her out of it. "I don't return calls from numbers I don't recognize," he said smoothly. "Didn't realize you'd started using unknown lines to reach me." She leveled him with a look, the kind that once made him step back without realizing why. But Michael was older now, colder. He didn't step back anymore. "I gave you time," she said, "months in fact, to handle this amicably, to finalize what we both know is already decided." Michael leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose. "I was handling it," he said. "No," Vanessa corrected. "You were stalling." Michael's jaw twitched. He hated being called out, especially when he knew he deserved it. Vanessa stepped forward, placing a manila folder onto his desk. "The settlement is finalized. The lawyers have signed off, and, as of today, so have I." She watched him hesitate, his fingers hovering over the folder before he finally picked it up, flipping through the documents. His gaze flickered over the legal jargon, scanning for the part that mattered most. Then, there it was. His eyes stopped, froze. Vanessa tilted her head slightly, waiting. Michael set the folder down, his expression unreadable. "You're taking the dealership." There was no question in his voice. He wasn't asking for confirmation. He already knew. Vanessa nodded once. That was always part of the agreement. Michael's fingers curled against the edge of the desk. "I built this place." "So did I." He met her gaze then, something like old resentment simmering just beneath the surface. "I ran it," he shot back. Vanessa's lips curled into something sharp. "You ran it," she echoed, "and you ran it into the ground." His mouth pressed into a tight line. She let the silence settle before speaking again, her voice calm, measured. "I let you have everything else, the house, the investments, even the offshore accounts I wasn't supposed to know about. I didn't ask for a fight, Michael. I just asked for what was mine." Michael exhaled through his nose, shaking his head slightly. "And what exactly are you going to do with it?" Vanessa's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Run it," she said simply. A beat passed. Then another. Michael closed the folder. "You're making a mistake." Vanessa reached forward, tapping a manicured nail against the folder's cover. "No, Michael, you made the mistake." She turned to leave, and just as her hand touched the doorknob, she paused, glancing back at him. "Oh," she added casually, "one more thing." Michael didn't respond. but she could feel his gaze burning into her back. She smiled. Tell Greg Patterson to clear out his desk. Michael's office had always been too big for him. That was the first thing Vanessa thought as she stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind her. The walls were lined with certificates he barely earned, deals he barely closed. He had always been good at making things look impressive, less good at actually being impressive. Michael stood behind his desk, one hand resting on the leather chair as if he could steady himself with it. He was already bracing for impact. He knew why she was here. So, that's it, he said, breaking the silence. His voice was measured, but there was something bitter underneath, something he was barely holding back. You couldn't just take your cut and walk away. You had to take this, too. Vanessa stepped forward, placing both hands flat on the desk, mirroring the way he had once loomed over her during their worst fights. I didn't take anything, she said evenly. This was mine before you ran it into the ground. Michael scoffed. You were never interested in the business before. Vanessa tilted her head slightly, watching him. I wasn't interested in saving it from you, she corrected, but I am now. His lips pressed into a tight line. You think you're going to do better? Yes, she said simply. He let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. You don't know what you're doing. I know how to read financial statements, she shot back. Unlike you. Michael's jaw clenched. He hated when she reminded him of that. He had always relied on his gut, on charm, on the illusion that he was smarter than he actually was. But numbers didn't lie. Neither did the bottom line, and that was exactly why he was losing everything. You can't just walk in here and expect everyone to fall in line, he said, his voice lowering. This business isn't about paperwork, Vanessa. It's about relationships. It's about knowing how to sell. Vanessa leaned in slightly. Oh, you mean like Greg Patterson? Michael hesitated. Vanessa smiled, slow and sharp. I ran into him earlier, she said. I'm sure he thought he was being clever, treating me like I didn't belong here. Guess he's going to be in for a surprise. Michael exhaled through his nose, shaking his head slightly. Firing people left and right isn't going to fix this place. Neither is keeping dead weight, she said. Michael let out another humorless laugh. And what about me? Vanessa didn't answer right away. She let the question sit between them, let the tension wrap itself around them like an unspoken truth. Finally she straightened, smoothing her blazer. You made your choices, she said. Now you get to live with them. Michael's eyes flickered with something almost vulnerable. Almost. But then it was gone, replaced by the same stubborn pride that had led him here in the first place. He nodded once, his gaze dropping to the desk. Fine, he muttered. Vanessa didn't say anything. She just turned and walked toward the door. As she reached for the handle, Michael spoke again, quieter this time. This business was the only thing I had left. Vanessa paused, just for a second. Then she glanced back over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. Maybe you should have treated it like something worth keeping. She pushed open the door and stepped out, leaving him behind. Greg Patterson hadn't even finished his coffee when he got the news. One moment he was standing at his usual post, leaning against the hood of a glossy sports car, half listening to a coworker drone on about his weekend. The next, Carla Owens. The Carla Owens was walking toward him with the kind of expression that made men straighten their backs and choose their words carefully. Greg didn't even have time to smirk. Pack your things, she said, her voice carrying just enough weight to silence the entire showroom. Greg blinked, the words not quite landing the way they should. Excuse me? You heard me, Carla said, her arms crossing. You're done here. His head jerked back slightly. Hold on, what the hell is this about? It wasn't Carla who answered. Your employment has been terminated. Vanessa's voice cut through the air like a blade, smooth, effortless, and entirely unbothered. Greg turned, his confusion deepening as he saw her standing at the entrance of the dealership. Not as a customer, not as a woman he had written off hours ago, but as someone who belonged there in a way he never had. The room shifted. The other salesmen, once content to ignore the scene, suddenly found reasons to busy themselves, flipping through paperwork that didn't need flipping, inspecting cars that had already been inspected. Nobody wanted to be in Greg's shoes right now. Greg forced out a laugh, though it sounded thinner than he intended. This some kind of joke? Vanessa stepped forward, heels clicking against the tile, calm and measured. No joke, she said, just business. Greg frowned, his brain working overtime to piece together the parts of a puzzle he didn't realize he was a part of. He started, then stopped. Because now he understood. The way Carla's posture was different, the way the air in the room had shifted, the way Vanessa stood there with a confidence that wasn't borrowed, but owned. His mouth went dry. What is this? Vanessa took her time answering. She tilted her head slightly, watching him with something close to amusement, but not quite. I believe the words you used earlier were, "This is a high-end dealership." Her lips curved, just slightly. Well, you were right. And you? You don't belong here. Greg's mouth opened, then closed. There was no bargaining, no arguing. The owner of the dealership had just fired him. It wasn't Michael Wilson who made the decision. It was Vanessa Wilson, the woman he had dismissed without a second thought. The silence in the room was suffocating. Greg scoffed, shaking his head. He turned to Carla, expecting, hoping for some kind of pushback. You're seriously letting this happen? Carla didn't blink. Vanessa owns the business now. The words settled like a brick in Greg's stomach. His hands clenched at his sides, but he didn't fight it. There was nothing to fight. Vanessa waited, watching as he sucked in a breath, muttered something under his breath, and stormed toward the back office to collect his things. The showroom stayed quiet until the glass door swung shut behind him. Then finally Carla exhaled, shaking her head. Well, she said, glancing at Vanessa, I can't say I'll miss him. Vanessa smiled, slow and satisfied. I'd be concerned if you did. A chuckle rippled through the remaining staff, hesitant, unsure, but relieved. Vanessa took a step forward, letting her gaze sweep across the room. She could feel them watching her, waiting, assessing. Some of them were uncertain, others just curious. They knew Michael, they knew the way he ran things. And now, there was her. She wasn't blind to the unspoken question in the room. What kind of leader was she going to be? She took a breath. I know this is unexpected, she said, addressing everyone now, and I know change isn't always easy. But let me make one thing clear. This dealership isn't going anywhere, and neither are the people who actually deserve to be here. A beat. Michael is gone, she continued, her voice steady. And with him, a lot of things are going to change. But that change doesn't have to be bad. She let that hang in the air for a moment. I'm not here to micromanage you. I'm not here to make things worse. I just want this place to be what it was always meant to be. A business that thrives, not one that limps along while someone bleeds it dry. Something shifted then. The tension in the room eased, just a little. It wasn't trust, not yet. But it was the start of something. Carla was the first to nod, crossing her arms. Well, she said, if that's the case, we better get back to work, shouldn't we? A murmur of agreement followed. Vanessa smiled. Yes, they should. She turned back toward the office, her heart still pounding, her mind racing ahead to all the things she had to do next. This was hers now. Not Michael's. Hers. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be.